Saturday in Cog Hill. Kylie had a reprieve, seeing she had her new best friend. She'd ended up staying over at this Brianna Henderson's house and was in no rush to come back. While Brendan and I were headed 3 hours northeast, the oldies who'd left at Sparrow's Fart were driving 2 hours southwest to see Daniel. They had to be there at 10:30 a.m, Saturday visiting time slot. Probably about now they were rolling into the car park with the other families. Why are just the oldies seeing Dan? It was more like a thought out loud. Few reasons, mate, Brendan replied, pulling up outside a house with a yellow stripy sheet hanging in the front window. Who lives here? Johnny. The engine was still running. Is Johnny coming? No. I need you to run in and collect some stuff for Finn, he told me. I'm ducking up to fill the tank. Be back in 5 minutes. I knocked on the door, waiting for Johnny's big head to appear. Hello, a sleepy voice said. It was a chick. She was a bit like Johnny, but it was hard to get a really good look as her black hair was tangled all over her face. She tried to force it behind her ears, but her fingers got stuck. I've got to get it cut. She giggled in a kind of embarrassed way. I nodded, not meaning I agreed, but what was I meant to say? Yeah, it looked like a bird's nest. You must be Tom. I saw you at school the other day. Yeah? I'm in year 12 at Benny's. Again, I nodded. I just caught eyes with the Bart Simpson head sprouting out of the slippers she was wearing. Classic, I laughed. You like them? She said, lifting a foot. Yeah. Anyway, I'm Chrissy. She smiled, showing the same white teeth as her brother. Johnny's sister. G'day, I'm meant to be collecting... I know, she interrupted. Stuff for your granddad. I'll just go and get it. You can come in, she called behind her. The sitting room was overtaken by an enormous flat-screen TV. Chrissy was rummaging through some bags. I think everything's here. After the granddad line, I figured it was safer not to question what was in the bags. Instead, I went for the TV diversion. Flat screen. Cool. Johnny sits there religiously watching every sports show. Footy, golf, tennis. You don't like sport? Come on, she laughed. My family's from Tonga. Rugby's second to God. Brendan tooted outside. Better be off. Bye. She walked me to the door. Hope your granddad's, okay. She thinks it's her granddad, I said, shoving the bags into the back seat. Whoever that is. Yeah, well, their old lady's a bit complicated, Brendan replied. Not everyone can handle the situation. No kidding, I mumbled. So what's in the bags? I leant over and pulled a gigantic lamb's wool booty out from the top. What do we need this for? It belonged to their father, Peter. Whoa. I measured the booty next to my shoe. Judging by the size, Johnny obviously took after him. He had a stroke, a real bad one, explained Brendan. The whole right side of his body was useless, and then he had another one, and that was pretty much it. The ute made the loop onto the highway. The sign said Arelon, 289 kilometres, Mum Billy, 670. I felt my guts turn. Poor bastard. Brendan was still talking. He couldn't walk, talk, eat. He was such a big, strong man. Yeah? I was only half listening. Yeah, nodded Brendan. He died a few years ago now. Got pneumonia in winter, and that was it. Now I understood why we had his sheepskin stuff. This'd be Finn's first winter. I swallowed hard. Look, Tom, I had to spin her a yarn, Brendan sighed. Rose, that's Johnny and Chrissy's old girl, is as religious as my mother. She thinks alcohol is evil. She hassles Johnny for having a beer after work. She believes everything the church says. Let's just say she's zero tolerant. Have you heard that phrase before? Brendan had turned red in the face. And anyway, it's not fair to Mum, people like Rose knowing. Mum's too old to cope with this sort of stuff. Johnny knows, I said. Yeah, nodded Brendan. I would have gone mad if I hadn't had anyone to talk to. For a while we didn't speak. I wasn't a mind reader, but I reckon Brendan was having the same thoughts as me. How did we end up here? If only things had been different. Turning the clock back, all that type of stuff. Finally he spoke. Apparently Dan's in a bad way. No one tells me anything. Look, I don't know if anyone knows that much. That's why they went on their own today. Find out what's going on. At least it gets your mum out of bed. That's the only thing that does, I scoffed. And I didn't want to say any more about it. I switched on the radio and fiddled for a station. We crossed the Dungog River, the tyres bumping over each ridge. In another hour or so, we'd be able to smell salt in the air. As a kid, this had been the smell of excitement, a reprieve from the scorching inland heat and Grand's nagging. A day mucking around in the ocean, boogie boards, meat pies, ice blocks, burying each other in the sand, then driving home in the evening, licking the salt from our burnt skin. Pa was slack with the SPF 30. He used to say a bit of sun never hurt anyone. We didn't argue. We'd grab our boogie boards and run. I must have smiled because Brendan said, "What are you smirking about?" I was thinking about when we used to come and stay in the Christmas holidays and Pa would take us to the beach. Yeah, Brendan smiled too. We'd always go to Arelon, to Maine's Beach. Dad's favourite, and close to the Arelon TAB, Brendan added. I reckon he did some of his biggest bets at the Arelon TAB where nobody knew him. He'd make us wait in the car and we'd be busting to get to the beach. Sometimes he'd be ages and we'd be boiling. We've all been there, Tom. One time, Daniel got out of the car and went for a walk or something. He was gone a long time and Kylie and I got really scared. We panicked and ran into the TAB to tell Pa. I still remember Pa saying, "I'll skin that boy alive." Bet he didn't. He got into a bit of trouble. I remember that because I copped it from him afterwards for dobbing. A memory that must have been 8 years old surfaced with such clearness it was like watching a home video in my head. Daniel swimming towards me, snarling, "You dobber." "Get lost," I yelled back. "No, you get lost, dobber. Dobber, dobber, dobber." He was getting closer and had that dark look only Daniel got, where his eyes flashed and looked evil and freakish. "You know what happens to dobbers? Get off." I started to punch the water, but he kept swimming towards me. "Dobbers get punished," he shouted, punching back with such force I didn't dare take a breath or I'd cop a mouthful of water. "I'm going to get you, you dobber." He managed to grab my foot. I tried to kick him off, but his 11 years had an advantage over my 9. He dragged me towards him and held onto the back of my hair. "I'm going to kill you." And by the look on his face, I believed him. He pushed my head under the water. I struggled under the weight of his hands, and each time I nearly surfaced, he'd shove me under again, his grip firmer. Who knows how long he held me under? A minute, maybe 15 seconds. What I can remember is the feeling of my head wanting to explode and how silent it was under the water. The Royal Prince Charles Hospital in Ireland had a better-than-average spinal unit, and that's where Finn had pretty much been since August last year. Except for intensive care, where he'd spent a couple of weeks when things were touch and go. Dad took me to see Finn the 3rd day after the accident. I found out later they didn't think he was going to make it. I can't recall any conversation. What had just happened to our families was so enormous, so beyond any comprehension, that all we could do was stand around, stunned and silent, watching Finn and a machine that heaved and clicked with each breath it took for him. "Hey, Tom." And here he was 6 months later. His hair had grown back and he could breathe for himself. But he'd never be the real Finn, the Finn I knew. "How's it going, bro?" "Finn," I said, shoving my hand in my back pocket, stopping the instinct to slap his like we'd always done. "How you going, mate?" "Not bad. They're talking about moving me to rehab." "Yeah, the old man told me." "Is he with you?" "Nah, I came up with Brendan. He's just gone to the dunny." "Take a pew, mate." On the back of Finn's bed read a sign, "Finbar O'Neill, C5, incomplete injury." I don't know why they didn't just write quadriplegic. He must have seen me looking. "He checking out my new mate?" "Hey?" Next to the sign was one of the grandmother's holy cards. "Yeah," I pointed to the serene face. "Who's the dude?" "One of Gran's boyfriends," grinned Finn. "It was a joke we had. Finn got a flogging once when Gran heard him calling St. Christopher her boyfriend." "I figured that," I told him. "But which one?" At least we still had Gran's saints to laugh about. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I don't think you've met St. Osmond." "I don't believe I have." I found myself chuckling. "What's he the boss of?" "Osmond, my boy, is the patron saint of paralysis." Suddenly it wasn't funny. I looked around the empty room, pretending my head wasn't starting to spin out of control. "Where are the others?" "The orderlies have been having a slack day. They wheeled the fellas out into the sun so they can have a smoke, check out the nurses having their lunch break. Just 'cause it ain't working doesn't mean you've forgotten." "Yeah?" I didn't know how to respond to that either. This was Finn's new world. "Is Martin still in this room?" "Marvin," corrected Finn. "He went to the rehab unit 2 weeks ago. You're down on the action, mate." "Yeah?" "Marv's replacement's a real beauty. Lucky for us he can't move or he'd be trying to murder someone." I opened my mouth and then closed it. I'd run out of comebacks. Finn filled the silence. "So, the Brennans moved." "Yeah." I wiped the sweat off my forehead. "You're a Coghill boy now." There was something about the way his top lip curled. Who would have thought? I swallowed hard. "Sorry, mate." Finn looked away. "Didn't mean it to sound harsh, just got too much time up here." "It's okay," I mumbled. "Wasn't your fault, mate." I shrugged and stared at my feet. I was thinking about it last night. Finn's voice was soft. That's all I seem to do at night, think. The nights are so long in this place. I hate them. My head goes off and I can't shut it down. I get real scared. He stared at the ceiling. "Do you think about it much?" My back straightened in the chair. "Do you?" "Yeah." I could hardly make my voice work. "I mean the actual night. Do you think about that night?" "The whole fucking mess," I whispered. I couldn't remember much for ages, but lately I've been remembering really stupid little things. I didn't want to go there. Not with Finn, not with anyone. But there were rules, that I understood. One of the rules was listening to anything Finn wanted to say. It was part of the deal. "Sounds weird," continued Finn, "but mostly I can see Dan's face, the way he looked that night." I nodded. I wondered how much Finn did know. I'd even prayed a couple of times that there was stuff he'd never remember. The doctors told Auntie Kath he'd lost a fair bit of memory, and perhaps he'd never get it back. Maybe not for Finn, but for the rest of us, it was better that way. I got this picture in my head of Dan swaying and yelling. You know that look he gets? I could tell by his lips curling down at the edges that this was hard for him. How could it not be? Finn lost everything that night. That look he gets when he's angry, real angry. There's something in his eyes that says, fuck all of you. Finn licked his cracked lips and swallowed. I can remember walking out of the hall too. I think I was looking for Claire. His eyes rolled up to the ceiling. They stayed there a while before he looked down and at me. Dan had you up against a telegraph pole, didn't he? I nodded. Yeah, Finn whispered. You grovelling little prick. Huh? That's what Dan said to me. My heart felt like it was being squeezed up my throat. You grovelling little prick. I don't remember that, Tom. I do. Brendan and Auntie Kath walked into the ward, their arms around each other. Even the Cancer Council sunnies that sat huge on Auntie Kath's face couldn't hide her red nose. Brendan went over to Finn while Auntie Kath wrapped her arms around me and squeezed me tight. Tom, it's so good to see you. You describe Auntie Kath as solid. She had the wide frame of Gran, whereas Mum had finer bones. As Auntie Kath took a step back to inspect me, I noticed the muscles in her arms were big, like a bloke's. Her biceps had to be twice the size of mine. It hit me that it was from all the lifting and rolling of Finn. You look too skinny, she scolded me. Aren't they feeding you at Cog Hill? I felt my face go red. Mum keeps cooking lamb's fry for them, piped up Brendan. Lamb's fry? Hasn't she got over that phase yet? I offered to cook the other night and she looked at me like I was some sort of moron. Brendan and Auntie Kath launched into a dissection of Gran's cooking disasters and the lamb's fry farts Pa used to do. I sat down watching them, wondering how they managed to look so relaxed in a place like this. I felt so tense. All I wanted to do was go back to my room, back to the darkness of the cave. One of the patients was wheeled back in. You could smell the shit. They drew the curtains around his bed and I heard him groan. Let's get you sorted, mate, one of the orderlies said. Fuck off, he started to scream. You assholes, get the fuck away from me. I didn't want to think what they were doing behind there. I looked over at Finn. He was watching me. That's my new neighbour, he said, his face staring into mine. Then he sighed and looked away. Come on, Brendan. I think Tom's had enough. No, I found myself frantically shaking my head. I'm okay. I might, just go to the dunny. The toilets were empty. I turned on the tap and put my head under, drenching my face in hair, tasting the water mixed with my sweat and fear. I banged my head on the mirror, the dull thud bouncing off the walls. It should have been a happy night. It should have been a great party. There was so much to celebrate. Thanks to Finn, we thought we'd escaped sudden death. But we were wrong. Instead, we'd walked into it. As Snorter steered the statesman around that last bend, I was still me, Tom Brennan, year 11, middle child, happy, free, no fuss type of bloke. Didn't think about much except my mates and footy. But as we turned the corner and the headlights shone on Daniel's blue Falcon up on its side against a tree, the front tyre still spinning, everything I thought I knew about who I was and who the Brennans were changed forever. I jumped out of the car and started running. The driver's door was open and I could see the silhouette of Daniel stumbling towards the bush, his arms wrapped around his head. The sound of leaves and twigs snapping under his feet echoed through the night sky. Daniel! I screamed. Daniel!